Hello and welcome to Unbuilt Skylines, a series that explores the rise and fall of some of history's most ambitious and extraordinary skyscraper proposals. Picture a gleaming silver spear piercing the Melbourne sky, reaching heights that would make even New York's towers look modest by comparison. Imagine a structure so audacious, so monumentally bold, that it promised to transform an entire city's identity with a single architectural gesture. This was the Grollo Tower, a breathtaking vision that came tantalisingly close to redefining Australia's skyline forever. In the mid-1990s, when most Australian cities were content with their modest urban profiles, one man dared to dream impossibly big. Bruno Grollo, a construction magnate with an eye for spectacle, proposed something that had never been attempted in the Southern Hemisphere, the world's tallest building. Not just tall by Australian standards, but genuinely, audaciously, record-breakingly tall by global measures. This wasn't simply about building another office tower. This was about announcing to the world that Melbourne had arrived as a truly international metropolis. The story begins in 1994. When Melbourne was experiencing a cultural renaissance. The city was shedding its conservative reputation and embracing bold new ideas about urban development. The Docklands area, a sprawling industrial wasteland of abandoned rail yards and crumbling warehouses, presented the perfect canvas for transformation. Here, amidst the decay and neglect, Grollo envisioned something extraordinary, a tower that would soar beyond anything Australia had ever seen. But here's where the story gets fascinating. Grollo didn't just want to build tall, he wanted to build smart. His vision went far beyond simple height records. The tower was conceived as a vertical city, a self-contained ecosystem that would house thousands of people while serving as a beacon of architectural innovation. This wasn't going to be another glass box reaching for the sky. This was going to be a statement, a manifesto written in steel and glass. The numbers alone were staggering. The initial proposal called for a structure reaching 678 metres into the Melbourne sky. To put that in perspective, that's taller than any building that existed at the time anywhere on Earth. Even after scaling back to 560 metres, the tower would have dwarfed everything in its vicinity, creating a new landmark visible from dozens of kilometres away. What makes this story truly compelling isn't just the ambition, but the meticulous planning that went into making this dream a reality. Grollo understood that a project of this magnitude required more than just deep pockets and big dreams. He needed architectural genius, engineering brilliance, and public support. That's why he turned to two of Australia's most respected architectural practices, each offering radically different visions for what would become known as the Grollo Tower. Harry Seidler, the legendary modernist architect who had already left his mark on Sydney's Skyline, was the first to take on this challenge. Seidler's approach was characteristically bold, yet grounded. His design featured a 120-storey tower wrapped in reddish-gold glass, supported by 4 massive pylons that would anchor the structure to the earth below. The aesthetic was powerful, almost temple-like in its grandeur, suggesting permanence and strength. Seidler's tower wasn't trying to disappear into the sky, it was making a statement about human achievement and architectural mastery. But Grollo wasn't satisfied with just one vision. In a move that would prove both wise and controversial, he commissioned a second design from Denton, Corker, Marshall, a Melbourne firm known for their cutting-edge contemporary work. Their response was dramatically different from Seidler's approach. Where Seidler had proposed something rooted and substantial, DCM imagined something that seemed to defy gravity itself. The Denton Corker Marshall design was revolutionary. Picture a sleek silver obelisk rising from a tripod of structural legs, creating the illusion of a spacecraft preparing for launch. The tower's form was minimal, yet striking, its reflective surfaces designed to catch and scatter Melbourne's changeable light in ever-shifting patterns. This wasn't architecture that blended into the urban fabric. This was architecture that transformed it entirely. In 1996, both designs were unveiled to the public at an exhibition called Victoria on Show. This wasn't just an architectural presentation, it was a democratic experiment. Melbourne's citizens were invited to examine detailed models, study the proposals, and cast their votes for the future of their city's skyline. The response was remarkable. Out of 35,000 participants, an overwhelming 70% supported building the tower. Even more telling, the majority preferred the Denton Corker Marshall design, embracing its futuristic aesthetic over Seidler's more traditional approach. The public's enthusiasm wasn't just about architectural preference. The tower represented something deeper: Melbourne's desire to compete on the global stage. This was a city that had long lived in Sydney's shadow, watching as its northern rival claimed the spotlight with iconic structures like the Opera House and Harbour Bridge. The Grollo Tower offered Melbourne a chance to leapfrog not just Sydney, but cities around the world, establishing itself as a destination worthy of international attention. The proposed programme for the tower was as ambitious as its height. This wasn't going to be a simple office building or residential complex. Grollo envisioned a mixed-use marvel that would function as a complete urban ecosystem. The base would house extensive retail spaces, creating a shopping and dining destination that could rival any major international precinct. Above that, premium office floors would attract multinational corporations seeking prestigious addresses in the world's tallest building. The residential component was particularly exciting. Luxury apartments would occupy the middle sections of the tower, offering residents unprecedented views across Melbourne and beyond. On clear days, the Dandenong Ranges would be visible to the east, while the Mornington Peninsula would stretch out to the south. These weren't just apartments. They were aeries for the elite, private spaces suspended high above the urban bustle. A 5-star international hotel would provide world-class accommodation for visitors drawn by the tower's fame and spectacle. Conference facilities and a 500-seat auditorium would position the building as a hub for business and cultural events. Most dramatically, twin observation decks near the tower's peak would offer visitors the chance to experience Melbourne from a perspective never before possible. The materials specified for the construction were as advanced as the design itself. High-performance structural steel would provide the strength needed to support such an unprecedented height, while specially engineered glass would create a facade that could respond to Melbourne's notoriously changeable weather. The reflective surfaces would shimmer in sunlight and glow dramatically when illuminated at night, creating a constantly evolving landmark that would never look quite the same twice. What's remarkable about this phase of the story is how close it all came to reality. This wasn't just architectural fantasy or developer speculation. Real planning was underway, real approvals were being sought, and real excitement was building throughout Melbourne. The Docklands Authority was supportive, the state government was enthusiastic, and the public had literally voted in favour of the project. But as we'll discover in the next part of this story, having a bold vision and public support isn't always enough to make architectural dreams come true. Enough to make architectural dreams come true? The euphoria surrounding the Grollo Tower wouldn't last long. By 1998, the political winds in Melbourne had begun to shift, and what had once seemed like an unstoppable architectural juggernaut was about to encounter its first serious obstacles. The man who had initially championed the project, Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett, remained enthusiastic about the tower's potential to establish Melbourne as a world-class city. Kennett saw the structure as more than just a building. It was a declaration of intent, a bold statement that Melbourne could compete with New York, Hong Kong, or any other major metropolis. Yet beneath this official support, cracks were beginning to show. The very audacity that made the tower so compelling also made it deeply controversial. Critics weren't just questioning the aesthetics or the cost. They were fundamentally challenging whether such a structure belonged in Melbourne at all. The shadow issue became the most potent weapon in the opposition's arsenal. Engineers calculated that a 560-metre tower would cast a shadow stretching up to 3 kilometres across the city, depending on the season and time of day. This wasn't just an abstract concern about urban planning, it was about fundamentally altering the character of Melbourne's most beloved spaces. The revitalised South Bank precinct, which had become a symbol of the city's cultural renaissance, would spend significant portions of each day plunged into artificial twilight. Melbourne's residents began to imagine their city transformed in ways they hadn't anticipated. The vibrant outdoor cafes that defined the city's social life could be cast into permanent shade. Parks and public spaces that had flourished in the Australian sun would become cold, shadowy places. For a city that prided itself on livability and outdoor culture, the prospect of a 3-kilometre shadow cutting across the urban fabric was genuinely alarming. The aesthetic debate proved equally divisive. Melbourne's identity was deeply rooted in its Victorian-era architecture, its network of intimate laneways, and its human-scaled streetscapes. The city's skyline was modest but harmonious, reflecting decades of thoughtful urban planning. Into this carefully balanced environment, the Grollo Tower would introduce a structure so massive and futuristic that it would fundamentally alter the visual character of the entire metropolis. Opponents argued that the tower belonged in Dubai or Shanghai, cities that had embraced vertical spectacle as part of their identity. Melbourne, they contended, was different. Its charm lay not in architectural showmanship, but in subtlety, livability, and respect for human scale. The silver obelisk that had seemed so exciting in the exhibition hall now struck many as an alien intrusion, a piece of science fiction architecture dropped into a city that valued heritage and continuity. The media response grew increasingly hostile. Journalist Jill Singer coined the devastating phrase "towering ego," suggesting that the entire project was less about civic pride than personal vanity. The implication was clear. Bruno Grollo wasn't building for Melbourne's benefit, but for his own aggrandizement. Editorial cartoons began depicting the tower as a monument to hubris, a modern Tower of Babel that would ultimately come crashing down. Town planner David Maul added professional credibility to the opposition, warning that the tower would create a visual nightmare that would undo decades of careful urban development. His concerns weren't just aesthetic, they were practical. Melbourne's infrastructure had been designed for a city of modest buildings and measured growth. A structure of this magnitude would strain transportation networks, overwhelm utilities, and create unprecedented challenges for emergency services. The environmental arguments proved particularly compelling to a city that prided itself on sustainability and green living. Critics calculated the tower's enormous energy requirements, its impact on local wind patterns, and its potential to disrupt the delicate ecological balance of Port Phillip Bay. The structure's size alone raised questions about resource consumption and environmental responsibility that the developers struggled to answer convincingly. Aviation authorities added another layer of complexity to the opposition. Melbourne's Tullamarine Airport operated along established flight paths that hadn't anticipated a structure of this height. The tower's peak would potentially interfere with aircraft operations, raising serious safety concerns that couldn't be easily dismissed. These weren't aesthetic quibbles or philosophical objections, they were matters of public safety that demanded careful consideration. Perhaps most damaging was the growing perception that the project served no genuine civic need. Melbourne wasn't facing a housing crisis that required vertical solutions. The office market wasn't so constrained that it demanded the world's tallest building. The city's tourism industry was thriving without the need for architectural spectacle. Critics began asking the fundamental question: who was this tower actually for? The answer seemed increasingly clear. It was for Bruno Grollo's legacy, for architectural photographers and for record books. But was it for Melbourne's residents? Was it for the families who would lose their sunlight, the businesses that would operate in permanent shadow, or the communities whose neighbourhoods would be fundamentally transformed? By 2001, these mounting pressures had created an impossible political situation. The project that had once enjoyed broad public support was now deeply divisive. The Docklands Authority, which had initially embraced the tower as a catalyst for urban transformation, was facing intense pressure from residents, environmental groups, and urban planning professionals. The final blow came in April 2001, when the Docklands Authority formally excluded the Grollo Tower from the tender process for the Batman's Hill precinct. This wasn't just a bureaucratic decision. It was the death knell for one of the most ambitious architectural projects in Australian history. The site that had been reserved for the world's tallest building would instead be developed with smaller-scale commercial and residential buildings that aligned with Melbourne's more modest urban vision. The tower's cancellation marked the end of an era in Australian architectural ambition. Never again would a single developer propose something so audacious, so fundamentally transformative of an entire city's identity. The Grollo Tower had pushed Melbourne to confront fundamental questions about growth, identity, and the price of international recognition. In the years that followed, rumours persisted that the Denton Corker Marshall design had somehow influenced the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. These stories, while ultimately unfounded, reflected a lingering sense that Melbourne had missed its chance at architectural immortality. The design that had been rejected in Melbourne had supposedly found new life in a city more willing to embrace vertical spectacle. But perhaps Melbourne's rejection of the Grollo Tower wasn't a failure at all. Perhaps it was a statement about values, about choosing livability over spectacle, community over individual ambition, and measured growth over architectural showmanship. Today, the site where the Grollo Tower was meant to rise houses a collection of moderate-scale developments that blend seamlessly into Melbourne's established urban rhythm. The Docklands has indeed been transformed, but through incremental change rather than revolutionary gesture. Where once a silver spear might have pierced the sky, visitors now find residential towers, commercial spaces, and public amenities that complement rather than dominate their surroundings. The legacy of the Grollo Tower extends far beyond its physical absence. The project fundamentally changed how Australians think about urban development and architectural ambition. It established precedents for public consultation that continue to influence major developments across the country. The Victoria on Show exhibition became a model for democratic engagement with urban planning, proving that citizens could and should have meaningful input into projects that would reshape their cities. For Bruno Grollo himself, the tower's cancellation represented both a professional setback and a philosophical lesson. The developer, who had dreamed of leaving an indelible mark on Melbourne's skyline, was forced to confront the reality that even the most audacious visions must ultimately serve the communities they claim to enhance. His subsequent projects would be more modest in scale, more sensitive to local concerns, and more carefully integrated into existing urban fabrics. The architectural firms involved drew different lessons from the experience. Harry Seidler, already established as one of Australia's most significant architects, continued pursuing bold modernist visions, but with greater attention to community engagement and environmental impact. His later work would reflect the understanding that architectural excellence must be balanced with social responsibility and urban sensitivity. Denton Corker Marshall, perhaps more than any other party, emerged from the Grollo Tower experience with enhanced international recognition. The striking design that Melbourne had rejected became a calling card for the firm's innovative approach to high-rise architecture. Their portfolio expanded globally, with projects that demonstrated the same bold aesthetic vision that had defined their tower proposal, but applied with greater sensitivity to local contexts and community needs. The broader Australian architectural community absorbed important lessons about the relationship between ambition and responsibility. The Grollo Tower controversy highlighted the tensions inherent in pursuing international recognition while maintaining local identity. It demonstrated that architectural excellence cannot be measured solely in terms of height, cost, or technical achievement, but must also consider social impact, environmental responsibility, and cultural appropriateness. Melbourne's decision to reject the tower also reflected deeper philosophical questions about the nature of urban development in the 21st century. The city was choosing to prioritise human scale over architectural spectacle, environmental sustainability over economic prestige, and community consultation over developer prerogative. These choices would influence urban planning decisions for decades to come, not just in Melbourne but across Australia. The shadow studies that had played such a crucial role in the tower's rejection became standard practice for major developments. No longer could developers propose massive structures without carefully considering their impact on surrounding neighbourhoods, public spaces, and urban microclimates. The Grollo Tower's phantom shadow had taught planners and communities alike to think more carefully about the unintended consequences of vertical ambition. Environmental impact assessments also evolved in response to the controversy. The questions raised about the tower's energy consumption, infrastructure demands, and ecological effects established new benchmarks for sustainable development. Future projects would be required to demonstrate not just financial viability and architectural merit, but genuine environmental responsibility and community benefit. The international architectural community watched Melbourne's decision with fascination and debate. Some viewed the rejection as a triumph of democratic planning over developer ambition, a model for how communities could assert control over their urban futures. Others saw it as a failure of imagination, a missed opportunity for architectural innovation and global recognition. The timing of the tower's cancellation proved particularly significant. As the new millennium dawned, cities around the world were embracing increasingly bold architectural statements. Dubai was beginning its transformation into a vertical laboratory of architectural experimentation. China was preparing for an unprecedented building boom that would reshape its urban landscape. Against this backdrop, Melbourne's rejection of the Grollo Tower seemed almost quaint, a reflection of more conservative values and measured ambitions. Yet as the years passed, the wisdom of Melbourne's decision became increasingly apparent. Cities that had embraced unlimited vertical growth began grappling with the consequences of their choices. Infrastructure strain, environmental degradation, and social inequality became pressing concerns in metropolises that had prioritised architectural spectacle over sustainable development. Melbourne, meanwhile, continued its steady evolution as one of the world's most livable cities. The measured approach to urban development that had led to the tower's rejection also produced an urban environment that consistently ranked among the globe's most desirable places to live and work. The city that had rejected the chance to build the world's tallest building had instead created something perhaps more valuable. A model for sustainable, human-centred urban development. The Grollo Tower story also illuminated the complex relationship between individual vision and collective decision-making in democratic societies. Bruno Grollo's dream had been genuinely ambitious and architecturally sophisticated, yet it ultimately failed because it could not accommodate the diverse needs and values of the community it was meant to serve. The project's failure demonstrated that even the most compelling individual visions must ultimately answer to broader social and environmental concerns. In architectural schools and urban planning programs around the world, the Grollo Tower has become a case study in the limits of architectural ambition. Students learn to balance creative vision with community engagement, technical innovation with environmental responsibility, and global recognition with local identity. The tower that was never built continues to teach important lessons about the practice of architecture in democratic societies. The story of the Grollo Tower ultimately represents a moment when Melbourne chose its future identity. Faced with the opportunity to transform itself dramatically, the city opted instead for evolution over revolution, sustainability over spectacle, and community consultation over individual ambition. Whether this was the right choice remains a matter of perspective, but it was undeniably Melbourne's choice, made through democratic processes and sustained by community values. Today, visitors to Melbourne's Docklands see a district that has been thoroughly transformed from its industrial origins, but through incremental change rather than singular dramatic gesture. The area bustles with residential towers, commercial developments, cultural facilities, and public spaces that serve the daily needs of residents and visitors alike. Where the Grollo Tower might have stood as a solitary monument to ambition, there instead exists a diverse urban neighbourhood that reflects the city's commitment to livable, sustainable development. The silver obelisk that might have pierced Melbourne's sky remains frozen in time, preserved in architectural drawings and exhibition models that capture a moment of unprecedented urban ambition. The Grollo Tower stands as a reminder that not all architectural dreams are meant to be built, and that sometimes the most important projects are those that force communities to examine their values and choose their future consciously. The Grollo Tower remains one of architecture's most fascinating might-have-beens, a project that revealed as much about Melbourne's character as it did about the limits of urban ambition. Though it never rose from the Dockland soil, the tower's legacy lives on in the planning processes it revolutionised, the community engagement it pioneered, and the fundamental questions it forced an entire city to confront. Perhaps the tower's greatest achievement wasn't what it built, but what it taught, that the most meaningful architectural monuments are sometimes the ones we choose not to construct. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing for more episodes coming soon. See you next time.